Good morning and good afternoon. I'm Dave Reibstein, professor of marketing at the Wharton School. I'm joined this morning with a colleague of mine, Raghu Iyengar, who is also a distinguished professor at the Wharton School. And today we have as our guest Santosh Mishra, who is a government official in India, and he has been so kind to spare some time today with us to talk about how it is that he and their government is responding to some of the issues that we have and are confronting today around COVID. And I'd like to get us started, Santosh, with just for our audience's purpose, if you could give us a little bit of your background and then tell us what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure, Dave and Raghu. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be sharing our thoughts on COVID and how did we handle this. So quickly on my background, so I'm a engineer by training. So I did my bachelor's from IIT Kanpur, which is Indian Institute of Technology Kanpur, which is Raghu's alma mater as well. So and then I went on to do my master's from University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. That was in VLSI design and digital signal processing, and following which I was working with the Bell Labs for almost 3 years.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So, and then things changed, and I came back to India, and I joined this very prestigious civil services and what is known as within civil services, the Indian Administrative Services, where you are basically driving policy and you are at the cutting edge of. So initial few years, you're at the cutting edge of service delivery and then and governance. And then as you become more mature and more experienced, you start looking at the policy dimension and strategy of governance, etc. So I've been with the government for about 20 years. In between, I've served in another state government for 5 years, which is in the Central India government of Chhattisgarh. And of course, remaining 15 years, I've been with the government of Tamil Nadu. And yes, and so I have worked primarily in the areas of vocational education, information and public relations, information technology, and tourism and culture. So, and of course, I was also managing director of several public sector units. So that's what I have been doing for last 22, 23 years. And now, of course, for last 2.5 years, I've been heading, not exactly 2.5, it's a little over 2 years. I've been heading this, I'm commissioner of e-governance for government of Tamil Nadu. And I also head the Tamil Nadu e-governance agency, which is kind of a little flexible government structure, which looks at all the emerging technologies and tries to implement them, adopt them, and lead them for governance. So this is a brief background of me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Santosh. Just for, again, our viewers, to give them a sense, I know you and I have written some knowledge at Wharton articles together. So just to give viewers a sense, Tamil Nadu, it has about 80 odd million people. I think it's, if I remember correctly, that's the population of Germany. And so, just to give people a sense of, what comes under your umbrella, what are the kinds of initiatives that are under your umbrella, and in particular, how have things been, especially around COVID in the last few months?
Absolutely. So I think you're right. I mean, we are from the southern part of India. As you know, India is a very large country. And thank you for pointing that out. It's almost population-wise, it's the size of Germany. If you look at the state GDP, it will be almost of the size of Finland, about $230 to $250 billion. what I do is basically there are three things which we do in this in our organization. We are responsible for all G2C services. So whatever services government has for the citizens, they get delivered through us. So we are, sometimes we call ourselves Uber of government services, if you will. And we offer about 120 plus government services on our platform. They are available for people to just go to the website and apply, or we have a network of 10,000 common service centers, because inclusivity has been one of our core thrust areas. So people who do not have access, or they find it difficult to navigate an electronic system, or they find it much more comfortable when there is someone to talk to, those kind of people, we cater to them through these network of 10,000 centers, which is practically one center in every village. And just to give a sense of numbers, last year we served 15 million individuals with their requests.
Wow.
So it was that's our this thing. So G2C is one, and so all government services like various social security schemes, food security, health security schemes, health insurance schemes, your certain important certificates like community and nativity certificates, etc., are issued through us. Also land records. So the entire land records and the spectrum of services which go along with it, they are offered by us. The other segment is, of course, G2G. So we are also, because we are the specialized organization in technology, so we also handhold, guide, and provide solutions to the other government departments. So we, whenever they have a need for technology or they want to evaluate a particular technology, they approach us, and then we do the entire end-to-end solution for them, drafting and creating with help of a vendor. Sometimes we do it in-house, sometimes we seek an external vendor. And the third thing is, of course, policy-driven, which is basically looking at creating policies which are required for government and governance to benefit from the full impact of emerging technologies, particularly. So we very recently launched blockchain policy, which is the first in the country for sure, and maybe one of the few in the world. We also were able to create this safe and ethical AI policy, again, a first in the country, and probably one of the first few in the world. So this is the policy initiative. And also we are constantly evaluating technologies which we are going to use in improving efficiency and service delivery for the citizens.
So Santosh, it's amazing to me as I hear all the things that you're doing, how it is that you've had to sort of up your game as a result of COVID. I know in the United States, there's been a tremendous transformation to people connecting digitally, and we see that in other parts of the world. Are you having to educate people about how to connect digitally, or is, I know the Indian population in general is very technological savvy, but is there some education level that you're also having to provide to get people up to speed as to how to connect digitally?
Right. I think Indian people of all people they love to be connected. So digital or no digital, they are always a connected lot. But of course, I think this COVID has actually sharpened the focus on digital connectivity very, very significantly. And I think while, of course, private sector always is kind of ahead in taking the lead or the first step in adoption of technology. In this case, the adoption of technology, I'm also a bit of a research scholar in information systems, so I keep looking at it from an academic prism as well. So the adoption rate of technology in governments has been amazing. So the very easy acceptability of work from home, very easy acceptability of people not actually congregating. And we in government are really uh, to the extent of being a bit obsessive about physical presence of everyone. So, but that has changed dramatically. I know board meetings are being held on conferences. I know in private sector probably it's not a big deal, but in government sector, I think it's a definitely a big change in attitude. So this has really, and I know, I mean, this year, the whole year, the school and the colleges were off. So my daughter, for example, she's in 7th grade, and for the whole year, her classes have been on a digital platform. And not only my daughter, I think the entire, uh, 30, 40 million children have been having their classes done remotely. Every school, I mean, they have tried to maintain the continuity by using digital technology, and that's where we saw a significant impact. Of course, it posed a few new challenges as well, but I think by and large, this is a change which has happened. Uh, the second thing which we have seen is that there was very little faith and acceptability of consulting a doctor remotely in India, particularly. Everybody wanted to physically be there. And this has again changed that attitude, and people are much more open to taking a consultation over video, using consultations which are automated, or at least have some parts of it is automated. So in education and in healthcare, we have seen a significant change in behavior patterns.
So Santosh, just to kind of build on Dave's question, if I take the perspective of, let's say, a villager in India, in Tamil Nadu, and you're trying to reach out to villagers like him, have you been reaching out differently than what you were doing before COVID? So are there different things that you have, new innovations that you worked on, which perhaps can give information to that person quicker and more efficiently?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, when the pandemic struck, even though we were not we are an organization who's supposed to be showing the way for technology adoption. So naturally, I mean, this was something first for us. So we were not really, I won't say that we were prepared for it, but suddenly we were called upon to create solutions which will help contain the epidemic. Mm-hmm. And, you had, and your point on reaching out to villagers is very relevant, because so Government of India came out with this app, which was called Arogya Setu, which is Bridge to Health, loosely translated, which was supposed to do this contact tracing automatically. And this works on a smartphone basis. It also not only does contact tracing, but also gives a lot of awareness messages and information to people what to do, how to do, where to go, where not to go, what to wear, how much distance to be maintained, etc., etc. But the point is that in India, while the penetration, mobile penetration, like any other country, I think is very high. We have 1.3 billion mobile connections, which is, I think if you go third decimal places, I think it's slightly larger than the population. Yeah. Of course, I mean, averages are always a bit of you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But the fact is that the penetration of phones is very high. However, only about 30 to 35% phones are smartphones. So people who have access to the app will be only these 35% people. Remaining 65% will still not be touched by this information campaign, which is run by Government of India. Of course, the Government of India started doing this caller tunes and all that. So whenever you call somebody, you will hear a long message about, Corona times, this is what you're supposed to do till you get the vaccines, don't modify your behavior, continue being precautious, etc. So first assignment which we got was to create a solution, and that was from Government of India, saying that can we have this inclusive, Arogya Setu, can it be inclusive? Can we have this app? People who don't have access to smartphone, can they use this information? So we created some IVRS response system, where we actually sat down with the health department, designed a set of 13 questions, and people had to just give a missed call to a number. So missed call is important because, sometimes people have very frugally have managed to get a mobile phone, and they may not have enough resources to spend on a 5-minute call, where the call is charged by a minute, or sometimes it's even charged by a second. So all they had to do was miss call, which is free. And then the system we created with help of BSNL, Department of Telecom, us, and IIT Madras, was that it will call them back, automated voice response, carefully curated set of 13 questions. People had to just say, speak, for example, what's your age? You just say 24, or you press a button 24 or whatever. And it analyzed that information and categorized them into 3 categories: safe, moderately risky, and highly risky. And then at the end of the day, these 3 categories was passed on to the health department, the local health unit of that district from where they called, that we were able to get it from the telecom service provider. And then we will reach out to them and make sure that if there are serious cases, they will get admitted. What it did was that it actually built huge amount of awareness amongst people. So initially we started getting a flood of calls. So initially the awareness was low, and we were getting almost 1,500 to 2,000, 3,000 calls in a day, which of course, as the time went along and the awareness built up, the television caught up, messaging improved, and so slowly tapered out. But that was one of the first. Second thing we were called upon to do is to regulate the people's movement. See, to contain this epidemic, we started restricting movements from contained areas, restricting movement of people who are not, whose movement is not essential. So we categorize this into essential services and non-essential services. Then we started giving this. So there was an e-pass system which we had to build practically in about 3 to 4 days time, which was crazy. And we worked, I know, 24/7, and I think it took us about 5 days, a good part of a week, to create this. And we actually issued, processed about 15 million e-passes for the movement facilitation over this last 6 months. Again, a mind-boggling number. And of course, it also helped because telecom, IT services, all these were classified as essentials, food services, milk, bread, etc. So they could move without being stopped anywhere, without being having any difficulty. And non-essential had to be. Third thing we had to do was we were called upon to do data analytics and GIS mapping of the cluster formations and where hotspots are emerging. So we started doing that. We have a very small team, but then again, they all work from home. Basically, we will get the data from health department, push it out to them. They will work from home, collate it, combine it, and push it back to within 24 hours turnaround time. We will give it back to all the 37 districts and the district collectors. Collectors are basically, I mean, the closest it comes to my mind is something like mayor of a city, if you will. Mayor is an elected entity. Collector is an executive head, which is not really elected. So he is basically, or she is the key decision maker for that particular geographic area. A typical district size is between 1 million people to about 3 to 3.5 million people population.
So this is absolutely amazing to me, hearing all the different things that you're having to do and that you're doing. How much of this is being sort of done on a national level versus having to be done state by state? And how are you coordinating across the various different states within India?
Right. So in India, we have a very clear system of division of work. So there is something called union list, and then there's something called state list. Of course, it's a pandemic, so really everybody was pooling their resources together. But healthcare predominantly is a state subject. So the states are charged with working in the health space. The entire infrastructure is owned by them. The entire paraphernalia, the medical services, the health workers, they all report to the state. Of course, there are few and far between capacity help from central agencies as well. But primarily, of course, I mean, as I said, this is a slightly exceptional circumstances where everybody pooled in their resources. State was being supported by Government of India in terms of getting the necessary, PPE kits, or initial phases, there was a huge shortage of, testing kits, masks and all that. So Government of India was really, really helpful in getting all that together. So I think it all ended up in a very, so what was what states could not do was supported by Government of India, and where states were having the resources, so they of course are anyway charged with the healthcare services, providing healthcare services, etc. In terms of resources and analysis, every state did their own, because again, the state administration is controlled by state government. So district collector is someone who reports to the state government, not to the Government of India or federal government. So it made sense that we did the analysis locally and gave it to the district collector to act upon it.
Right.
Of course, we got all the necessary inputs from Government of India. So whatever the Arogya Setu app, for example, identified that there is a hotspot which is likely to emerge, that information came to us. We kind of, we already had a lot of information with us, correlated with that, and again passed it on to the district collectors.
Wow. So I think, again, back to the journey that we were talking about, Santosh. I mean, I think last few months clearly have been very turbulent in terms of, your own kind of department kind of adopting new things, perhaps trying out new things, seeing what works, what doesn't work. One of the things that we had talked about, just for our viewers, is how, for example, things in India have also changed from a legal point of view, where many of the initiatives are about virtual kind of decisions being made in lots of different kinds of cases. Would be great for our viewers to hear about all the things happening in that end as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one transformation which has really taken off. And I think, and this again, I mean, out of the blue, I got a call from the High Court saying that because of the pandemic, we have not been functioning for last so many days, and we cannot be like this. So why can't you suggest a solution? And we sort of immediately evaluated what was available in the market. We suggested them a platform which can work well for them, and they really took a great liking to it. And today, in fact, the entire High Court, and in fact, they have also started implementing it in the district level of judiciary. Entire High Court hearing, of course, now they have. So slowly it has evolved. So initially it was fully at the peak of the epidemic. They started from no hearing to only emergency hearings at the residences of the honorable judges, to all virtual hearings and functioning as normal, to virtual hearings and partial physical hearings under a very restrictive set of environment. So, and this has worked out. I mean, what the feedback I get from the judges and the lawyers and the attorneys and everyone, it's amazing. I mean, they are so happy with the system, because the lawyer tells me that it's so convenient. I can attend one court, and you know how high courts are. I mean, they have like 23 different courtrooms, and you have to actually physically, if you're a lawyer and you have like cases in one court and then you have to rush to another one, I mean, it's a bit of a challenge, and you don't know what's going on there and you don't know what's going on here. Here, it was all virtual. So you could just quickly see that when is your case listed before which judge, when it is coming, and then you just finish off, and then you do your arguments, and then you get back to your whatever regular work is there, till your case again gets called on, and you have the terminal right at your desk, and you don't have to really move. So it actually improved productivity by a significant amount. And this is one change which I think is going to stick around for a while.
Santosh, that's exactly the question that I wanted to pursue with you, is because there are so many things that have changed, and it came upon us very suddenly with the pandemic. But some of it sounds like it is working exceedingly well. And as you were just saying, the lawyers, the judges are really, very happy with this. What are all, if I think about all the different things, the e-medicine, the online education, the change in the judiciary system and other things that you've talked about, which of these do you think are going to be sticky and stay with us as we, once we get past this pandemic and we go back to normal life? What's going to be normal life as we look into the future?
Right. So I predominantly focus on citizens and the interaction of citizens with the government. And I see So for example, I was looking at the data from we have two modes of access to government services. One is you go to physically to the common service centers, and then you put in a physical application, and the person or the operator there, he assists you, he asks you, or he or she asks you the questions and fills up the answers for you and tries to deliver the services using an online channel, but you don't have to physically do that. The other option is that you actually log on to the website and actually do the transaction yourself. I have seen a significant uptake in the online, we call it Open Citizen Portal. We have seen a significant uptake on the Open Citizen Portal. The growth has been what was about 10 to 15% is close to 30, 35 to 40%. And on days I have seen about 40, 45% of transactions happening on Citizen Portal. So this is certainly an indicator that acceptability of e-governance, acceptability of e-methods of doing things is increasing. And this is very good for us, and particularly for a country like India, which has, you look at the doctor-patient ratio, you look at the teacher-student ratio, you look at the agriculture productivity. There is a huge scope of improvement. I was looking at the statistics somewhere. On an average, Indian doctor spends about 25 seconds with the patient. US, that number is about 25 minutes. Wow. So this is something which you can fill in. Obviously, you can't manufacture doctors overnight, but you can actually augment his or her reach multiple times overnight. I mean, having these smart diagnosis. We are working on a solution which is the Blindness Control Society. So there is a large number of cases where people actually, and particularly in the rural areas, they do not seek medical attention, and as a result, their cataract becomes so bad that they lose their eyesight permanently. Now, to get everyone to be examined by a doctor is, we know there are limitations, right? I mean, in terms of number of doctors, in terms of reach. So they said, can you do an app which can tell me that this is a 95% confidence level, this is a cataract case. So we are working on a solution which is working. I mean, the preliminary results are indicating very good result. It's accurate 85 plus, and I think it's only very few data. We have trained few hundreds. I think another few thousand, and I think it will improve up to 95%. So this mobile app, any of the health workers can just actually take it and go to the person and just click a photograph of his eyes or her eyes, and that's it. And then you know that these cases need to be immediately brought into the center. You have limited resources. So instead of spending and stretching it thin in identifying people, or identifying the cases which need your immediate attention, you use your resources in actually doing the surgical intervention or preventive intervention which is required. So for a country like India, where resources, and I think more or less, I mean, I'm saying India, but because here things are a little more accentuated, but I think all countries have a perpetual dearth of resources. It doesn't matter which quartile of wealth they reside in. So this is what and this has to do with people's acceptance of technology. I think one of the challenges of AI has been that people don't trust that technology. And I think that's one significant, in fact, we talk about it in our AI and ethical AI policy, that how do you build trust in AI? And part of the way you build is by making it explainable, etc. Anyway, that's a separate topic. But what I'm saying is that this epidemic has made acceptance of technology go up by a significant level. And when people start trusting the technology and they are assured that there's a human in the loop, and don't worry, I mean, it's not like it's going and coming and cutting you up or something. I mean, it's not going to make an incision into your body. There is a human being who will look at it and make sure that it is it's appropriate. So that is going to happen, and that will make a change in healthcare, in education, same thing. What if you could use these technologies? I mean, when the things come back to normal, you don't really have to have these remote classes, which in my opinion are a bit of an overkill for a young student, but they have tremendous use otherwise. I mean, how about if you could just identify the weaknesses of a particular child or a strength of a particular child and kind of gave a complementary smart, AI assisted learning solutions to him or her, or if you could pick up, if the system could just by looking at the video can analyze what's not getting registered well into a particular child and customize your education, customize your healthcare, customize your citizen services to the needs of individuals.
Great. I think this was a wonderful conversation, Dave. Other questions, or we should start?
No, I think this is fantastic. It is amazing to me all the things that have transpired in a relatively short period of time. It seems that you are right in the center of it, and tremendous progress that you're making. And I think the rest of the world can learn a lot from what's going on in India and what many of the things that you've described are happening in your state as well. So we both appreciate you taking the time this evening, and look forward to returning to a normal life, whatever that's going to be as we go forward. But thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Santosh.
Hey, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Raghu. Thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure, and look forward to meeting you sometime when the things get back to normal. So,
Absolutely. Take care.
Sounds great. Thank you.
bye.